Everyone, welcome to the Power of Voting series panel. Basically, today on the panel we have Jessica Burns, which is the Director of Leadership and Engagement here on campus, and we also have Professor Adam Lusk and also Professor Zoga, basically to be a liaison, just to teach and inform people about some of the most important things going into voting during this upcoming presidential and congressional election. So if there's some things that you guys want to talk about, any questions that you'll have, will be open, available to ask any of the panelists towards the end of our session. But one thing that we're going to do, we're going to start off with a small word from Sister Peg, and remember, not in honor of Dante, just a small thing. But yeah.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good, okay, all right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm glad to be with you, and I'm glad this is on Zoom. I just attended the blessing of the Africa Faith and Justice Network new office in Washington, D.C. And the director, a Nigerian priest, began by saying, God finds us in our workplace, and God finds us wherever we are. So let's just take a minute to remember that our God, whatever we call God, mystery, divine being, creator, this marvelous force, this loving force is with us and is with Dante as he waits for probably for surgery because of the gun wounds. We pray for his family, his father especially, and his son. And we ask for healing for him, and we pray for whoever shot him, whatever would make another human being do that. We pray for the person who was in the car with Dante. And we also just remember all of his co-workers over in the dining room, you know, who are very saddened by what's happened. So for all of these people and for all of us, we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right, perfect. Thank you, Sister Beg. Now we're going to get into some of the questions that we have on our panel. So one of the biggest questions that a lot of voters have going into this election are, what are some of the things that you need to know as a first-time voter? Jennifer Zoga, do you want to take it over?
Some of the things you need to know.
Yes.
Well, you need to know how to register from, and where your polling place is and how you can get your ballot and submit your ballot in a way that you feel most safe and works most conveniently for you. I mean, we're all looking at the news and seeing these long lines and hearing nervous chatter about distrust in the system. But I think what I will, I think my position on this panel is the marketing and the noise, and my hope is to get you to turn down that noise and really focus on what you have control over and what your rights are. And so if you haven't registered to vote, or if you registered and then moved because you're a student, you need to take some steps right away to make sure that you are registered and can vote. And if you plan to do it remotely, you need to do that by the 20th in Pennsylvania, and it may even be sooner in if you're from a different state.
Just to add to that, exactly, this idea about registration is an interesting part of the U.S. political system, that it's important you have to register to vote. You can't not just show up at your polling place and vote. As Professor Zoga suggested, as a college student, you actually get the opportunity to either register to vote at Rosemont at your new location, or you can register to vote at your current home address as well. So it's your choice, and sometimes you can be strategic about it. Pennsylvania is what they call a battleground state. So if you want to have more an influence on your presidential election votes, and you live, let's say, in New Jersey or Delaware, you could choose to register to vote and keep that registration in Pennsylvania versus having it in Delaware or New Jersey. But realize then you're voting also, we tend to focus only on the presidential elections, but then you're voting also for your local representatives, both in the US Congress, but also in the Pennsylvania State House and in local municipalities at the same time too. So you want to be considering those things when you're deciding where to register, and knowing that the rules for registration do differ state by state.
All right, sounds good. Jess, do you have any words on that?
Yeah, I really, just to echo what Professor Zoga and Lusk said, it's very important to know your voting plan, you know, how you're going to vote, not necessarily, obviously you should know who you're going to vote for, but know how you're going to vote. Are you voting by mail? Are you going to go in person? Are you, do you need someone to come with you? Like, do you have a language barrier? You know, those kinds of things that you need to kind of figure out before November 3rd. Professor Lusk said, you just can't show up, you know, am I at the right polling location? Things like that. And I think it's really important to also know, like, as a voter, you do have voting rights. You have, it's your civic duty and right to vote as a registered voter in the United States of America. So, you know, I know one concern I've had a conversation within my own personal circle is, you know, we're seeing these long lines across the country already at early voting locations. And what if I get in line and I don't vote before the polls close? You know, and Professor Lusk and Zoga, correct me if I'm wrong, but provided that you are in line ready to vote before the polls close, they have to accept your vote because you are there, you showed up and you showed out. So, you know, those are little things that you want to make sure that your vote is heard and it counts, and it's just as important as everybody else's.
All right, perfect. Thank you, guys. Next, Professor Lusk, I would love if you can go into basically try to explain to some people here today that wouldn't possibly understand, how does the Electoral College work, and what are some other election systems that we could possibly use here in the United States?
So you've asked a big question there. I'll show you a couple maps to just get some background here a little bit on the Electoral College. Let me switch to this slide here. And so you see here a map of Electoral College. Electoral College is the primary way of electing a president. I'm going to oversimplify this a lot, but each state receives electors based upon the number of House of Representatives and a number of senators in a state. This is one of the reasons, as a sidebar, that the census is such a contentious issue with the coming up, that the number of people are going to determine how many members of the House of Representatives are in a state. So these numbers, after the census is counted, not for this election, but for the next election, will be changing. So each of these numbers will be changing. So you can see here, you know, Pennsylvania has 20 electoral votes, whereas California has 55, and Delaware has 3. Yeah. The tricky thing about the Electoral College, I'll switch to this slide, is that every place except for Nebraska and Maine has a winner-take-all system. So if you win the most votes in the one particular state, you get all of those electoral votes. So, and I'll pull up, you can see here, in 2016, Donald Trump won Pennsylvania and therefore received all 20 electoral votes. Mm-hmm. And let me see here. And so this is kind of the breakdown. And he gets all electoral votes, even though he won the state by less than 50,000 votes. Okay. And so it's just whoever wins the most in that state gets all those electoral votes. As you can see here, I put in, because I saw another question before, as you can see that third party candidates, right, received over 200,000 votes within Pennsylvania. And so that's why these numbers don't add up to 100%. So it's, that's the interesting thing about the Electoral College in terms of winner take all, but that is determined by the actual states themselves. This is not, the idea about winner take all is not something written in the Constitution. So states can decide to switch to different types of voting systems. And that's where, going back to this map, you can see that Maine actually has a proportional representation type system, and so does Nebraska. And so they can split up the votes based upon the proportion of votes that they have. I can go more into that if people have more questions as we move, but I'll stop there before I bore you with too many PowerPoint slides.
Does anyone, can someone speak about who makes up the Electoral College and who exactly are these people? Yeah,
so they are people chosen by each political party. And so once, let's say Pennsylvania, it's where we live, so it's a classic example. There's a slate of electors chosen by the Republican Party of Pennsylvania, and then there's 20 people chosen by the Democratic Party of Pennsylvania. And once the voting takes place and you figure out which side wins, they go and send those 20 people to cast their votes for the president. Most, not all, but most states have a law that those electors have to pick the person that was chosen by the people. The system was set up in the Constitution that the electors could choose whoever they wanted. And there were cases of that historically, but those are, you'll hear like the term unfaithful electors being in the news and things like that. It's extraordinarily rare. Most states don't allow it. And to the point that the Republican and Democratic parties are not going to pick people to go on this who are going to necessarily choose the other side. So it's a very rare occurrence that something like this would happen.
That was actually my next question, because a lot of people are concerned about that aspect of like, oh, we're not even really truly voting. And that's something that scares a lot of people, because it's like, why am I even going to my polling place? Why am I even voting at all? If a lot of the people, if basically these people that I've never met, never heard of, get to go and decide for me. But they have to understand that a lot of these systems are kind of put in place, like the winner take all system. It's decided on the popular vote. It's decided on the thing. So it's important for you to still go out and vote. It's important for you to still go to your polling place and make your voice heard. So I think that was a important thing to talk about. Do any of you ladies have anything to speak more about the Electoral College?
Just I had a question for Adam, because it is confusing. And I recall that in the primaries, I thought we, as in my party, selected, I voted for people as part of the electoral representative, like the representatives should my party win, right? Trying to keep it completely nonpartisan, right?
Nonpartisan.
Yeah, but that's the choice of each state's party to whether or not, they're going to appoint the electors, you're going to choose the electors, these types of things. And the other thing is that primaries can be run differently than the general elections. And so I think this relates to another really important point that was brought up very much at the beginning. Voting is very much run state by state. It can be run differently. everything from registration in Pennsylvania to voting in Pennsylvania could be different than just New Jersey. And so going from who's the electors to whether there's mail-in voting, whether there's how you register to vote, all of those things are very state by state, which is an important part of our federal system. So that I think that's a common theme you're going to hear from me is this idea that it is state by state how voting works.
Yeah, completely understand. So going into our next question, voting is state by state, things and everything like that. But what are some of the big items? What are the big ticket talking points that everyone's talking about going into this presidential congressional election this year?
Go
ahead. Some of the things that I feel is important to me as a voter, like like the concept like of intersectionality and how it plays in voting. So like for me, it would be race relations as well as going into healthcare and like understanding how that whole thing works and how that affects me and like what are the decisions that those people in office would make. And like, that's the type of things that are concerning to me. So like, what are other things that people should be focused on or should be thinking about or looking to check to see if the person they will be voting for aligns with their own personal beliefs? So what are some of those things basically?
I think that you've touched on it very well, that you should be voting based on how this affects you and the people that you care about. And so some of the big buzz topics that we see over and over again in the media are, the pandemic and the handling of the pandemic, the economy and the great shock that has happened to the economy because of the pandemic. That trickles down to, job loss and home insecurity and food insecurity, as all topics that are very much in the news. And then you take them along with other things that you care about. Sister Peg was talking about, the Catholic mission, things that matter to you and your orientation of where you want to see planning and leadership direct over the next 4 years of policy change.
Would anyone else like to speak on that? Jess?
Yeah, I think for something that has been really sticking out in my mind in this election is the Supreme Court appointment, and whether or not that appointment should move forward before the election, after the election, who gets to decide, who will fill RBG's seat on the bench. And I think something that some people don't always recognize is that the Supreme Court, they make decisions that are going to last a lifetime. They're making decisions that they just don't get overturned every other day, or that they don't go to the Senate floor. They're making decisions like the Brown versus Board of Education, Roe versus Wade, those big name
landmark cases.
Yes, thank you. Landmark cases that set the precedent for how how the law is executed in our country. And that's something that's really important to me, because we're not just talking about things that are going to affect me. We're talking about things that are affect my children and my children's children, and so on and so forth. So that's something, obviously we want to think about the here and now and the short term, and like, what are the next 4 years going to look like? But it's also important to what are the implications of someone winning this election? How is that going to affect us 10 years down the road or 20 years down the road? So that's something that's been in the back of my mind for this election.
One huge thing about Supreme Court and the Supreme Court nomination is that people who are on the Supreme Court, they're in there for life. We don't go out and vote for them. We vote for the people that put them in. So it's important to be knowledgeable about those people that have, like your Senate, like the Senate hearings. That's the reason why it's important to go out and vote. That's how the whole checks and balances system works. And that's how you know that your hand touches every part and different part of the government. You vote for the people that put in that or nominate the people that go into Supreme Court, and the people that stay in the Supreme Court staying for life, and they check the president, this and the third. It's the way the whole system works. So it's important to be knowledgeable about that and learn more about the new Supreme Court nominee, Amy Barnett, going into and just paying attention to that whole thing. But yeah, Professor Lusk, do you have anything to say about that?
Well, I'd like to pick up your thread. It's not it's a little bit different than the original question. Then I'll come back to the original question. One of the things that happens is that traditionally in the United States, almost exclusively for the past 100 years, is that people come and vote during presidential election cycles. So the voting will be higher. Maybe I'll just show it again. Why not? Why talk about it when I can show it? Here we go. And we'll do it here. This is just turnout here by race and ethnicity. But you can see here that there always are dips in years that there aren't presidential elections. More people come out to vote when there's a presidential election than there's a dip. And one of the things that was mentioned was this idea about, well, with something like a Supreme Court, it actually needs to be confirmed by the Senate. In Pennsylvania, we're not voting for any of our senators this year. But we will vote for a senator in 2 years when it's not a presidential election. So it's important, yes, to vote for a president, but oftentimes much of our influence as voters is just as important in non-presidential election years. Many of the issues and things that are important to us are not just happening at the national level and decided by the president. Things like taxes and the economy and jobs are very local issues, whether it's the mayor's race in Philadelphia, whether it's city council races, whether it's House of Representatives or Senate races. So it's important that we think of voting not as a once in a 4-year type of thing, but something that that we engage in more than just this one-time thing, because it's important here for those representatives at all levels of government. And so thinking about those issues both at the national level, but also at the local level too. What are the things important to you? And that's going to really help you. If you focus, I think what Professor Zoga was highlighting is important. If you start about what's important to you and the people you care about, then you can go into the debates, and then you can go do research. Where do they stand on those issues that are really important to me? Because it's going to be different for me and Professor Zoga. It's going to be different for anybody else here on the call. We might have some commonalities, but there's going to be different priorities for us. So taking a look at those, what you find is important is a good place to start.
And also, as the graph that Dr. Lusk shared, it's almost like you have a greater impact with your one vote as a percentage overall in the off presidential year, because fewer people are voting. So therefore your vote is a greater percentage of the entire, picture. And if anyone who has taken my class, I always start my classes with the Sheryl Sandberg sit at the table. And really, you don't get to affect change if you're not part of the conversation. And so the vote is being a part of that conversation.
Exactly. All right, sounds great. That kind of answered our actual question that we're going into next. How do I decide who to vote for? And just to re-echo that whole aspect and point is basically you decide who to vote for, once again, like Professor Zoga said, about who you care for, who you care about, and also your own personal security.
Can I also address how you don't choose how you vote for?
Oh, yeah.
One of the things that's happened over the past 10 years is social media. And social media has turned into a sound box for people who have the most vocal opinions and have led in an effective way by triggering emotions in us. And when you make an emotional decision about something like leadership without actually thinking about what your core values are and what the person who is running for office, how they align with those values. If you just have a knee-jerk reaction based on the noise you're seeing on your social media, you're not really an informed voter. And I'm happy to discuss that further, but I thought that was important.
No, it is an important aspect, because a lot of thing about like politics, especially during the election cycle, anytime, but it's a lot of it's sensationalized. It's a lot of it's like, how can I, and it plays a little bit into like the debates and how candidates do speak to voters. Like, how can I get the perfect one-liner that will stay in like a person's head so they remember when they're going to a polling place, or something that will the news would be talking about, or to get the social media channels are discussing what are the type of things that I can do to make sure my name is, rather than the issues. It's become less focused on the issues kind of in an aspect. So I think it is an important conversation to have. But if you want to talk a little bit more about that just for a little bit, that sounds great.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Okay, I finally have found what I was looking for, and it's sort of a scorecard, and it gives all the different issues that each person on this call might be concerned about. And I could just read a few of them. I'm going to send it, but just to give you an idea, the top one being seeks to overturn Roe v. Wade, and it says what President Trump thinks and Vice President Biden. It's either a yes or no.
Yeah.
Okay, would increase pregnant women's access to healthcare and nutrition, addresses maternal mortality, particularly in Black women, supports families in the tax code and family-friendly workplace policies, advocates for domestic violence survivors, rejects racism, supports Native American tribes, opposes discrimination against LGBTQ people, opposes the death penalty, believes housing is a human right, believes healthcare is a human right. All those, so it's, and I love what's at the end. Pope Francis says, a good Catholic meddles in politics. And I think by that he means gets involved.
Yeah.
Knowing the issues, as you said, and then voting.
Just to add on to that, there are a number of different scorecards like that different organizations will put forward. So once again, finding the issues and values that are important to you, and then finding some organizations that might have those scorecards that reflect your particular values. So you can see who they're, and that is not to say that you're going to find a candidate that perfectly aligns with your preferences. That's just not going to happen in the system we have set up. Is that, you're not going to find one that matches all of your issues. Just because we have just two major political parties, there's really only two major candidates. And so you've got to make priorities, right? You've got to decide which are the most important to you and who seems to be closer to your priorities in that sense. And looking at these scorecards from various different organizations, many of them are nonpartisan. You do have to be careful. As Professor Zoga is highlighting here, you do have to be careful with some of them, that they are nonpartisan or that they have are providing a more objective view of those scorecards. And sometimes it helps to go back into the candidates' websites themselves to see if that is actually the things they're advocating for. But most of them, there are good resources out there for finding scorecards and things like that.
Exactly, I would agree. All right, Professor, do you want to finish your thought on what you said on social media and the impact it'll have on this election?
Well, I see a lot of stress and anger, as well as, there's emotional contagion that is being manipulated in the marketing for political candidates. And it's not just in the advertising that's being run by the candidates themselves, but by people who have an agenda, who are creating memes, who are creating, heated content debate and vitriol and within social media. And that's all noise that's trying to get you to feel a certain way so that you react in a certain way and then vote that way. So I just want to make sure that everyone, you feel those things. And I'm not saying to dismiss those feelings, but when those feelings cloud your judgment of thinking for yourself and why do you feel those things, it's almost like having a mindfulness to step out of that, to really go back to what those issues are and why you're feeling those, to make a call and vote with your heart, not with a trigger.
Yeah. So less reactionary politics and more informed politics. Perfect way to describe it. Next, going into something Professor Lusk touched on a little bit in the last time he was talking, should I vote third party? So it's not going into this election. We have a lot of different things. We have the Green Party, like always, the Libertarian Party, the Constitution Party, even some big pop star names like Kanye West. So going into this election, should I vote third party? Would that be a way to be part of something historic or and something like that? From a student perspective, first time voting, should I vote for Kanye West?
So I'll start. I'll bring up that same slide to highlight it and to emphasize it. And I do want to emphasize here, I will never tell you whether you should or should not vote for somebody. And I think that is a very personal decision. And I think it's a really important decision to make it. I understand, I think part of the question, and I'm reading into it, and please don't tell me I'm wrong, is that there's two aspects of it. One is my vote wasted if I vote for a third party candidate?
Yeah, exactly.
And the second part is, I don't like either of these candidates. I feel bad voting for somebody I don't necessarily agree with. And so those are competing types of feelings. And once again, I think it sounds like I'm saying the same thing or I'm obfuscating here, is this idea, if you know which candidate is closer to your particular values and interests by kind of saying, hey, what are the issues important to me, right? You're going to see whether or not I should vote for one of these major candidates who might be closer to the side, okay? The reason why many people say voting for a third-party candidate is a wasted vote is because of how the system is set up in a winner-take-all format will only allow, and this is just political science 101 here, will only allow two major political parties. It's the system that leads to these two major political parties of winner take all. If we had a different system, let me like go here. Sorry. Like proportional representation, exactly, or something along those lines. You would have a case where smaller parties would be able to win votes and have more influence on election and have more viability. Okay. And so that's really, you could see here, type of thing that those people who are voting for third-party candidates could have swayed the election either way in 2016, right? So you've got to make that decision here about which candidate is closer to my preferences and whether or not I want to vote not for somebody that has a chance to win. So it's a good question, and it's important also to see the reason why third-party candidates are not successful. It's because of how the winner-take-all system is set up in this particular way we do elections.
And I think what we're dealing, a lot of the underlying theme of both of those questions, both of those is this, that the system, if you're asking to vote for a third party candidate, you are saying you don't like the system, but you can't change a system by being outside of the system. You have to, if you believe the system is broken, you should. I hope that you recognize that sitting at the table gives you a better opportunity to affect change. And it's not just voting once a year, once every 4 years. It's actually, this is the first step in becoming an advocate for your beliefs and being a part of it.
Basically learning how to dismantle the system from the inside, working its way out. That's the way that me and my friends talk about it. It's like you can't take down someone without knowing their tricks. You gotta understand. I feel like that goes to a whole different thing. But
can I just add a slight addendum there? Sure. Once again, this is just at the presidential level. There are many different cases of third-party candidates at local or municipal elections, or even at the statewide elections, as being successful in being able to do it because the system is set up differently. And so that is a different area, a different thing to be considering when you're voting and things along those lines. But even going back to the point about values in your issues and scorecards, you can find, even for the most obscure types of races in third parties, you can find where the positions of these particular candidates are. They're not keeping it secret for the most part. They want you to know because they think that you will vote for them because of these types of things. So so I just wanted to add that qualifier there too.
All right. Going to one of the bigger things, one thing I feel like is most important and most important aspect of being a informed voter, basically, is how do you understand / break down a candidate's talking points during a debate? Because that's the biggest thing. Because a lot of times, me and my friends would get together, or people on campus would talk about, it's so hard trying to understand what they're talking about during these debates. And so, and trying to get a grasp of what their plan would be for basically the country for the next 4 years, if I don't understand some of the things that they're even talking about or they're even discussing, some people don't even understand the aspect and how important healthcare is, or what role something like that would play, or how the presidential can vote affect a homeless person that they pass while they're driving's life. They don't understand the role something like plays, but so we can talk a little bit about that. How do I understand what they're talking about when they're they're arguing with each other on the stage? I'm sorry. But yeah.
I would love to get a history lesson of debates from Dr. Lusk, because the way that debates are now is nothing the way that they were originally intended. Now they are a vehicle for sound bites. Yeah. And it is not, the rules are not being adhered to. And the game that they're playing is not the original intent.
Yeah, and I just to echo that, I think that's where it becomes important to educate yourself on what is important to you and what the lasting effects of those policy changes are going to be. And the Commission on the Presidential Debates, they're kind of the guiding organization for those events. They provide past transcripts for debates that have happened in the past, and you can kind of see what Professor Zoga said, in the past, how debates have run and how they should run. And I feel like the first presidential debate wasn't exactly the model debate that we should be, saying like, oh yeah, this is what a debate looks like. So I think it's important to, be in tune with those, or that group specifically, the Commission on Presidential Debates, because they do provide, these are the important topics we're going to talk about at this debate. These are, they provide a scorecard for you to follow along with, and how you thought a specific candidate responded to a question, just looking into those resources and having that information handy. Not just sitting around with your friend. It's good to sit around with your friends and have that conversation in your residence hall room, or, look for the fly that lands on a candidate. But, you want to also have resources available on your phone, or, through the commission's website, and understand fully in depth what is being discussed. And if they're avoiding the question, maybe looking more into that, what is the reason why you're dodging the question? What is their past policy stance? What have they said in the past? Or just being educated on what they're talking about.
One big thing that I think is something that if you don't know, that you should really know, there's no immediate fact checking happening during any of these presidential debates, a lot of things. So it's very important that while you're watching the debates, that you are doing what Jess says, like making sure going in where they stand on everything. So be like, hey, that's kind of interesting. Like, I'm trying to say not partisan, just one aspect of it is like, you can say like President Donald Trump, he can say that like, I'm an advocate for clean energy, but then he has a history of investing in the coal industry and stuff like that. So that kind of, he wants to bring back that. So kind of seeing how he has done in the past doesn't really level up to what he's saying during the debate. So those are the type of things you can focus on. But yeah, Professor Lusk, do you have anything to speak on that?
Sure. Yeah, maybe going back to Professor Zoga's point about history of debates, like debate. We're no longer in the case where the Lincoln Douglas debates where they would debate for 3 hours,
yes.
Right? And it would be a 3-hour debate and they would cover every issue. And so they're not going to cover every issue, and they might not cover the issues that are important to you. And so that's important and sometimes problematic, right? I think it sounds like I'm repeating myself here, but I think the best thing is going back to what Jess said about preparing yourself ahead of time, about identifying the issues that are important to you and seeing, hey, are they speaking on those issues? And what is their position? It is good. I've shared a resource in the past that students have found useful or others have found useful. The League of Women Voters has a site on how to watch debates, right? And they kind of highlight many of the same things that we've been highlighting here. Hey, know your facts ahead of time, see what is important to you. These types of setting your priorities and things like that will really help you cut through a lot of the noise, as Professor Zoga highlighted, and get to know it. So there are some ways to do that, but I think it's also important to realize that debates are not a very good vehicle on finding out exactly what the candidates stand on issues, that it is much more of this trying to present your particular, either your leadership style or some sort of representation of things, rather than necessarily being an informative place.
I did drop in the chat those two groups that we talked about. So the Commission on Presidential Debates at www.debates.org. And then the League of Women Voters that Professor Lusk mentioned, they can be found at www.lwv.org. So if that's, something going into, the town halls tomorrow and a potential third, or I guess second debate in the coming weeks, you know, you can kind of follow along on what's going to be talked about and how you should be approaching that event.
All right, so perfect that we got that kind of covered.
Oh, you're unmuted.
So in our last couple minutes on that we have here, we can just briefly go over again the different methods of voting and how that's relevant to this election, how that plays a part into how COVID-19 is going to affect these elections. So why it's important to know the different methods of voting. But yeah, real quick.
I can start that I've already voted. I am a resident of Pennsylvania. I voted in person in the primaries in the spring, and my husband voted by mail, and we tested out both systems. And I decided that I was going to apply for the ballot because there were a couple of safeguards that I felt made me comfortable. So there is a deadline. I think it's October 19th in Pennsylvania to register and to apply for a mail-in ballot. So, and because the mail is not being as reliable as possible, I recommend if you are considering doing that, you should get off this call and do it right away to get your ballot. There's another option too, which is if you are a resident of Philadelphia, which I am, Philadelphia has opened up is opening up 17 early ballot locations where you can also register and get your mail-in ballot there. So you go with your ID, you can register to vote, you can register to get the mail-in ballot, and they will give you the envelope there. You leave the polling station, you can fill it out at your leisure, and then you can go back in and drop off the ballot. I had mine mailed to me, filled it out at home, went to the polling place of my choice, and there wasn't a line. It was really easy. There was a woman who checked you in. There was a gentleman who made sure that I had signed the envelope on the back, and then there was a police officer who was standing by the door, and I put my envelope into what basically looked like a tiny little trash bag, kind of with a little slit. And I was done. They gave me a sticker and I was done. Then a week later, I received an email that said that they had received my ballot and it was approved. And then they're going to open the inside ballot and count my vote on the 3rd with everybody else's.
Yeah. And so mail-in ballot is an aspect, the picking up a ballot and dropping it off at your polling place is an aspect, as well as in-person voting. Is there anything else that I'm missing? I don't believe so.
Yeah, I think one thing to consider too, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of people are worried about voting in person and, you know, standing in a long line with other people that they're not in their personal circle, right? And you don't know, you know, who they've had contact with. So I know there's, you know, some people have said, oh, I'm going to order my mail-in ballot. I'm not really sure if I'm going to vote in person or not, but they're, you know, going to request it just in case. If that is the case, you want to make sure that if you do request your mail-in ballot and then decide that you want to vote in person, that you have that mail-in ballot invalidated, because I'm pretty sure that once you request a mail-in ballot, you are on the register as a mail-in voter. So if you would go to your polling place after requesting a mail-in ballot, they would have you as already voted, or already receiving your ballot. So that's something you want to make sure you take the necessary steps to make that decision early, and not on the morning of November 3rd or on the morning of October 19th or whenever the deadline is to send in your mail-in ballot. And you start to think about, what is my voting plan going to be? You know, do I feel comfortable standing in line in the middle of a pandemic? You know, is that something that I'm okay doing, or for the sake of, you know, those around me, I'm just going to vote.
There's also, to make it more confusing, the provisional ballot. So if you choose to, sign up for a mail-in ballot, and then for whatever reason you don't get it, it doesn't come to your house, or you get it and you don't feel comfortable sending it in, you can go to your polling place. If you have it, bring it with you and they will rip it up there, and you will do a provisional ballot, which will be different than going to the machine. It will be counted, and then it gives them a flag to verify that you haven't voted twice.
Yeah. And a lot of things everything around like voting fraud that's going into election, please pay attention to that. Look at past histories of how mail-in ballot works, and don't worry a lot too much about that. And if I would say a lot of slowdowns based on my own personal research is due to a lot of defunding of the UPS, of the Postal Service here. So that's kind of like just paying attention and focusing on that, and understanding that you can do what you can to make sure that you ensure that you're safe. But I believe in the state of Pennsylvania, to ensure that your vote gets counted and say that you do mail it in, you do have to do two types of envelopes. You have to do the regular ballot that comes in, as well as a secrecy envelope that has to be sent into the mail for your vote to be counted. So that's something that's really important that I feel like I should mention if you decide to do anything like that. But any last words for Professor Lusk? Do you have any last words? Jess, do you have any last words? Professor Zoga?
I would just iterate what you just said, Brooks. Follow the instructions. The instructions are there. Treat it like a test. Read all the instructions, and it's not going to be overly complicated. You should be able to do it. But yeah, the whole idea about having a secrecy envelope and things like that did pose some problems for people because they didn't read the instructions on doing that. So just no matter what your state, you're going to have instructions on how to do it. So just read those instructions.
All right. And
don't throw any pieces of it away. Don't have the whole envelope. Don't throw any of it away until you send it out.
Yeah.
Anyone have any questions that they want to ask our panelists? Anything real quick?
It's not a question, Brooks, but just to follow on what Dr. Lusk said about there being a lot of different scorecards. And regarding issues, I sent Jess one to send to all of you, but that's one of many. So just take his advice and look online for others.
All right, perfect. I really enjoyed this panel. I hope you guys did too. I appreciate everyone for being on. Please, once again, thank all of the panelists for participating in today's event. I think that's everything I want to say. Just thank you guys for coming. Please vote. Bring a friend when you vote. If you
Absolutely.
vote, stay 6 feet, wear a mask. Take all the precautions necessary. But it's important. Go vote. Don't not vote. Don't let your voice not count when you have an opportunity to. So yeah.
And it feels really good to do it. It feels like it's a hassle, but it feels good.
I did something important today. Oh my God.
And if you're a student on campus, we are doing voter registration this week. I might have mentioned that earlier. So if you have any questions about registering to vote, SGA and the basketball teams are volunteering at our table this week, and they can help you figure out what your plan is going to be. And also we are looking into, if you're registered here on campus for Bryn Mawr, for the college's address, we are looking into providing transportation to our local polling station on November 3rd. So if you don't know, how you're going to get there, if you can't drive, we're going to hopefully provide an opportunity for that. So, stay plugged in with all of us, ask questions. It's the most important time to ask questions, definitely. So,
most important time.
Absolutely.
And questions are good.
Questions are great.
Exactly. All right, guys. All right. It was great talking to you all. Thank you all for coming. Tell your friends to watch the recording. But yeah, bye everyone. Have a nice day.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
No problem.
I have my bat behind me, so hence the earbud.
Yes, stay on. Bye. You guys can leave if you would like.
Good job, y'all. Thanks. That was awesome.
Oh my gosh.